Late 1944, Hampton Roads, Virginia. A fog crawls over the harbor like smoke from an invisible fire. The deck of the U.S. Army transport ship General W.P. Richardson creaks as its engines slow. On board stand 40 women in gray Luftwaffe uniforms, their eyes hollow from weeks at sea. Among them is Anna Keller, 24, a radio operator trained in the Luftwaffe's Air Defense Corps. For 2 years, Berlin's broadcasts told her that America was collapsing under its own greed. Factories idle, citizens rioting, a nation of weakness. But when the gangplank lowers, she freezes. Stretching before her are miles of humming machinery, cranes loading tanks the size of houses, lines of bombers glittering under the winter sun. Beyond the dock, freight trains rattle endlessly toward the horizon. There is no chaos, no hunger, only power. She whispers to the interpreter beside her, voice barely audible. "It's not possible. They told us America had nothing left." The guard glances at her, unsure what to say. For Anna, the world has just split in two, the one she was told existed and the one she now sees. This moment, a single step onto foreign soil, will unravel everything she believed about war, enemies, and truth itself. Autumn 1944, Western France. Rain drummed on the corrugated roof of a communications post near Lorient, one of the last German-held ports on the Atlantic. Inside, Anna Keller and a handful of other Luftwaffe auxiliaries man their radios, relaying fractured messages between the crumbling coastal batteries. Outside, the 3rd U.S. Army was closing in. Supplies had stopped. Ammunition was rationed to the bullet. The Reich had promised reinforcements. None came. When Allied artillery finally began to fall on the city, Anna crouched beneath her desk, clutching her headset. "Keep transmitting," her superior barked. "Berlin must know we still hold." But the cables had already been severed. Static filled her ears. By the 3rd day, their commandant gathered what remained of the garrison. Barely 100 soldiers and 10 women. They burned papers, smashed code machines, and waited for orders that never arrived. At dawn, an American patrol appeared through the smoke, white flags raised by the defenders themselves. Anna stared as they approached. The enemy soldiers were young, calm, faces dirt-streaked but confident. One offered her a canteen. She hesitated, then drank. The water was cool, shockingly human. Captured. The word felt impossible. Women of the Luftwaffe were supposed to serve behind the lines, safe from the humiliation of surrender. Yet here she was, hands trembling, being loaded onto a truck bound for a holding camp on the French coast. Inside the truck, whispers spread among the women. "They'll send us to England," one said, "or use us for propaganda." Another murmured, "We won't survive the voyage." But the orders from Allied High Command were clear. Every prisoner, male or female, must be processed under the Geneva Convention. And with Europe's camps overflowing, that meant transport to America itself. When the guards told them, silence fell. America? For Anna, it was like being told she'd been captured by a myth. 2 weeks later, they stood on the docks at Cherbourg, watching the gray hulk of a Liberty ship loom over them. The air smelled of oil and salt. American medics checked each prisoner, tagging them by number. A nurse, a woman in uniform, bandaged a scrape on Anna's hand. Anna stared at her. You are a soldier?" she asked in hesitant English. The nurse smiled. "We all are, in our way." It was the first crack in the story Anna had been fed since childhood. Below deck, the German prisoners were assigned bunks in the cargo hold. Conditions were cramped, but orderly. Meals arrived twice daily: stew, bread, coffee. Guards spoke quietly, avoided insults, and kept routines strict but predictable. Each night, the engines throbbed like a heartbeat beneath the floor. The women whispered about home, about rumors that Allied bombs had destroyed entire cities, about whether their families still lived. Once, when the ship rolled through a storm, Anna crept to the porthole and glimpsed the American sailors above, working wordlessly in the rain. They laughed between orders. One whistled a tune she didn't know. How could men at war still sound so free? She pressed her palm to the glass and thought, if this is what defeat looks like, what does victory mean? Halfway across the Atlantic, the convoy spotted a U-boat's periscope slicing through the waves. Klaxons blared. The ship's guns thundered. The German prisoners froze, torn between dread and loyalty. Was that submarine there to save them or sink them? When the explosions faded and the captain announced the danger had passed, Anna felt only exhaustion. The U-boat had fled. Her countrymen had left them behind. Something shifted in her then. A quiet, unspoken understanding. The Reich she served wasn't fighting for her. It was fighting for survival even at her expense. 2 weeks later, the ship reached the American coastline. The harbor lights of Virginia glowed like a new world rising from darkness. For the first time in years, there were no air raid sirens, no blackout curtains, no fear. The women gathered on deck as dawn broke, silent as the fog parted. Freight cranes moved like giants. Rail lines vanished into the horizon. Workers in overalls sang as they loaded crates labeled Detroit Automotive Division tanks. Anna's throat tightened. Every machine, every sound contradicted everything she'd believed. America wasn't starving. It was unstoppable. Behind her, one of the women whispered, "It's not possible." Anna didn't answer. She simply stared at the endless horizon of industry and thought, we never had a chance. That morning, as she stepped onto American soil for the first time, her boots struck the dock with a hollow echo, the sound of an empire's illusion breaking. Would the world she was about to see change her, or would the old beliefs still cling to her like a uniform she couldn't remove? The first thing Anna noticed when they disembarked wasn't the soldiers, it was the noise. Engines, voices, machinery, the pulse of a nation in motion. For months she'd heard only silence broken by sirens. Germany had become a country of whispers, ration lines, and bomb craters. But here, in Virginia, the world roared with life. Trucks rolled past stacked with lumber and fuel. A locomotive screamed somewhere in the distance, hauling tanks westward. On the dock, women in denim coveralls worked alongside men, unloading cargo with practiced rhythm. Anna blinked hard. Women, working as equals, laughing with soldiers, giving orders. In the Reich, she'd been told democracy made people lazy, that freedom weakened discipline. But here, order and freedom seemed to walk hand in hand. An American officer motioned them forward. Single file. Let's move, ladies. His tone was firm but not cruel. Anna's group followed, escorted toward a row of tents where Red Cross nurses waited. Their boots squelched against wet planks, and the air smelled faintly of diesel and coffee. Coffee. The aroma stopped her mid-step. Back home, coffee was a memory, rationed to nothing, replaced by bitter chicory. A nurse offered her a tin mug. Drink. It's real. Anna lifted it carefully, warmth seeping into her fingers. The first sip made her eyes sting. It wasn't just coffee. It was comfort. She didn't say thank you. She couldn't find the words. But in that moment, the image of the barbaric, brutal enemy she'd been raised to hate began to dissolve. The processing tents were efficient, almost mechanical. Each prisoner's name, rank, and service number was recorded. Doctors checked for injuries. Uniforms were collected and replaced with clean, plain work clothes stamped PW in bold black letters. A young American sergeant took Anna's identification card and glanced at her. Luftwaffe Communications. That's something, he said. She stiffened instinctively, waiting for mockery or interrogation. Instead, he handed her a folded blanket. You'll need this. Nights get cold here. That was all. No sneer. No insult. Just decency. Anna followed the others into the truck waiting outside. The convoy drove through the outskirts of Norfolk, past miles of shipyards. Everywhere she looked, cranes lifted metal, welders sparked, factories whirred. This wasn't a starving nation. It was an industrial empire. In Germany, she'd been told America's power came from greed, from chaos. But this wasn't chaos. This was precision multiplied 1,000 times over. As they passed a row of houses, Anna noticed something that made her heart twist. Children playing on the sidewalks, waving at the trucks. No ruins, no fear, just sunlight and laughter. She thought of Bremen, her home city, the ruins, the ash, and for the first time, she felt something she couldn't name. Envy, maybe, or grief. Hours later, the convoy reached a sprawling military camp inland. Rows of wooden barracks surrounded by barbed wire, guarded by soldiers in olive drab. Above the gate hung a simple sign, Prisoner of War Camp Number 27. It was nothing like she expected. Inside, the grounds were tidy. POWs, German men mostly, walked in groups, some cutting wood, others tending small gardens. Guards watched but didn't shout. There was discipline but not hatred. One of the older women whispered, "It's a trick. They'll use us for propaganda." Anna wasn't so sure anymore. At registration, an American lieutenant explained through an interpreter that they would be assigned to light work details, farm labor, sewing, clerical tasks, under the same rules as male prisoners. They would be paid in camp scrip, allowed to buy small comforts, cigarettes, notebooks, chocolate. The interpreter hesitated at that last word. Yes, chocolate. Murmurs rippled through the group. None of them had tasted it in years. That night, in the barracks, Anna lay awake listening to the hum of the camp generator. Outside, floodlights cast pale halos through the mist. Across the room, someone whispered, "They don't hate us." Another voice replied, "Maybe they want to make us forget." Anna stared at the ceiling. "Forget what?" she said softly. The silence that followed said everything. Days turned into a rhythm. Roll call at dawn. Work assignments. Meals that were plain but plentiful. Every system worked like clockwork. Even boredom here felt luxurious compared to fear back home. One afternoon, an American officer introduced them to a group of WACs, Women's Army Corps soldiers. They were young, confident, and carried themselves with pride. Sergeant Thompson, tall and smiling, said, "Ladies, in America, women serve too. You'll see." Anna studied her closely. The uniform pressed, the tone direct, yet warm. In Germany, such confidence would have been labeled arrogance. But here it looked normal. Later, in her notebook, Anna wrote, "They do not fear authority here. They cooperate with it. We were told that made them weak. I think now, it makes them strong." Weeks later, an incident shook the camp. Not through violence, but revelation. A new group of male POWs arrived from the front. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes haunted. They spoke of Germany's collapse, of cities flattened, of Hitler hiding in bunkers, of divisions fighting ghosts. The women listened in disbelief. The Reich they'd sworn to protect was already gone. That night, Anna found herself standing by the fence, staring at the stars. For the first time, she allowed herself to ask a forbidden question. If the cause we fought for was a lie, then who have we been fighting for? Her reflection in the wire looked like a stranger. The next morning, while walking to the work yard, she caught the scent of baking bread from the camp kitchen. She glanced through the doorway. 2 American cooks, one black, one white, laughing as they kneaded dough together. In the Reich, such a sight would have been unthinkable. Anna froze, staring. She remembered her instructor's words. America is weak because it mixes races, creeds, and classes. Yet here it was working, people from opposite worlds sharing the same table, feeding hundreds, laughing while they did it. For Anna, it was like watching propaganda dissolve in real time. She turned away, unsettled but curious. That night, as she wrote by candlelight, she paused and whispered to herself, "They don't need fear to build strength. They build it through cooperation." She stared at the flame. What if everything we were told was the opposite of the truth? The thought terrified her, not because it condemned the Reich, but because it meant her life until now had been built on sand. Outside, the American flag fluttered in the wind, calm, unwavering. Inside the barracks, for the first time, Anna Keller didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like an observer of a world she'd been forbidden to imagine. And she wasn't ready to look away. Morning mist rolled over the barbed wire like a living thing. Somewhere beyond it, a bugle sounded reveille. Inside the women's compound, the air carried the mixed scent of soap, bread, and sawdust. the smell of a world trying to rebuild order out of chaos. Anna Keller woke before dawn now, not out of fear habit. Even as a prisoner, her body clung to discipline. But this discipline was different. No slogans, no shouted orders. Just routine. Predictable, calm. When she stepped outside, she saw the camp already stirring. A handful of German men were repairing fences under the watch of a single American guard who barely glanced at them. The freedom grated at her at first, the illusion of it. But over time, she began to see it wasn't illusion. It was trust. In the Reich, trust was dangerous. Here it was a system. The women's barracks shared a courtyard with the men's camp, separated by a double line of wire. Voices drifted across. Laughter, songs, arguments in German. Someone had carved a makeshift chessboard into the dirt. Anna joined. A small work detail in the camp library. A shack lined with books donated by local universities. She was assigned to catalog the German language volumes. She ran her fingers across the spines. Goethe, Schiller, Kant. Names she hadn't thought about since before the war. Beside them sat English books. Steinbeck, Hemingway, even a translation of the Federalist Papers. She opened one at random, scanning the words. Democracy, freedom, equality. Phrases she'd been told were empty propaganda. But the prose was clean, certain, confident. Later that day, an American officer named Captain Raymond Lee stopped by to inspect the inventory. He was quiet, polite, maybe 30. "You read English?" he asked. "A little," she said. He nodded. "Good. Books are better company than barbed wire." His tone wasn't condescending. It was weary, human. Anna studied him for a moment. The enemy she'd imagined all her life was supposed to be arrogant, cruel. This man looked more like a schoolteacher than a soldier. At noon, she sat under the shade of the watchtower, eating from her tin mess tray, stew, beans, a square of cornbread. She'd seen the same meal handed to the guards minutes earlier. It was a small thing, equality in rations. But it meant something. Nearby, another prisoner, Lieselot Brandt, a former Red Cross nurse, said softly, "Do you realize they feed us better than Berlin feeds its own citizens?" Anna didn't answer, but the truth was undeniable. In Germany, she'd stood in ration lines that stretched for hours. Bread made from sawdust, water blackened by soot. Here, in the land she'd been told was decadent and corrupt, there was abundance, even mercy. Days blurred into weeks. The Americans encouraged activities, music, crafts, even sports. "Idle minds make trouble," one guard joked. Anna's group was given permission to start a small theater program for the women. They performed German poems and short plays. Guards came to watch. Applause echoed inside the wire. Soft, cautious at first, then genuine. It was surreal. Freedom inside captivity. During one rehearsal, Anna noticed something strange. When she read her lines, she no longer imagined Berlin audiences or Nazi officers. She imagined her fellow prisoners smiling, American soldiers listening quietly in the back. For the first time, performance felt like communication, not obedience. Afterward, a guard told her, "You've got a good voice. When this war's over, you should keep using it." She smiled awkwardly. "And say what?" He shrugged. "The truth, maybe." One evening, Captain Lee gathered a small group of prisoners to show them Allied newsreels. Not propaganda, just updates from the front. The first reel showed the Normandy landings. Thousands of ships. Armies moving like clockwork. Anna felt her stomach twist. So much power. So much organization. The second reel showed something else. Something the Germans weren't meant to see. Footage from liberated camps in Poland. Piles of shoes. Children staring blankly at cameras. Smoke rising from empty barracks. The room went silent. Anna's hand trembled as she gripped her knees. Lieselot whispered, "No, it's fake." Captain Lee said quietly, "It isn't." No one spoke again. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. The images replayed endlessly, the truth she had been protected from. She remembered the slogans, the oaths, the pride. And then she remembered the faces on the screen. Her faith in the Reich didn't crumble all at once. It eroded, piece by piece, under the quiet weight of reality. A week later, she found a letter waiting for her, intercepted by censors but approved for delivery. It was from her brother, still in Germany. Anna, we are alive. Bremen is gone. The house is ash. Father says we must not lose hope, but I do not recognize the people anymore. Everyone is afraid of each other. You are lucky, I think, to be where you are. She read it 3 times, her eyes burning. Lucky to be where you are. A prisoner. In enemy territory. And yet, he was right. Life in the camp began to take on a strange rhythm. Guards and prisoners exchanged small talk, even jokes. Some Americans practiced their German. Some POWs their English. The war outside was ending, but here a different kind of battle was being fought. A battle for perception. The U.S. didn't just want to imprison them. It wanted to re-educate them. Not through lectures, but through demonstration, the lived example of fairness, equality, and order without cruelty. It worked. Each day chipped away at the mental walls they'd built. Each simple act, a shared meal, a respectful word, a night without fear, was proof that freedom didn't mean chaos. It meant trust. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the camp, Anna stood by the fence and watched the flag lower. The sound of taps carried through the air, mournful, beautiful. Behind her, Lieselot whispered, "Strange, isn't it? The more we see of them, the less we hate them." Anna didn't answer right away. She just looked at the horizon and said quietly, "Maybe the strongest walls we built were the ones inside ourselves." The war was ending outside. Inside, a different transformation had already begun. The kind that no treaty could enforce and no propaganda could reverse. Freedom had become contagious. Spring, 1945. The war that once felt endless was now ending faster than anyone could process. Word spread through Camp 27 in whispers. The Americans had crossed the Rhine. Berlin was surrounded. The Führer was trapped in his bunker. First, no one believed it. Then, one morning, Captain Lee pinned a single notice to the bulletin board outside the mess hall. "Germany surrenders. Unconditional." The words looked almost small, too small to carry the weight of history. Anna Keller stood in the crowd, staring at the paper as if it might dissolve. Around her, some prisoners gasped, others turned away. One man laughed bitterly. She didn't move. For months, she had lived in a strange limbo, a prisoner who was no longer sure who the enemy was. Now, in a single sentence, everything she'd fought for vanished. She thought of her uniform, locked away in a storage trunk somewhere in the camp's warehouse. She imagined it covered in dust, just like the Reich it once represented. For the first time in her life, Anna Keller felt weightless and utterly lost. That night, the Americans screened another film in the rec hall. The guards said it was important. The projector flickered to life. The reel was labeled, "The Camps." Anna didn't understand at first. She saw barbed wire, emaciated faces, hollow eyes staring directly into the lens. Mountains of shoes, bulldozers pushing bodies into pits. Lieselot beside her whispered, "They're fakes. They must be." But then the footage showed German officers standing beside Allied soldiers, cooperating, identifying victims. It wasn't staged. It was undeniable. Anna covered her mouth, unable to breathe. Her hands shook. Her mind screamed, "No, not us. Not our people." But it was. When the reel ended, the lights came up slowly. The room was silent. Captain Lee stepped forward. He didn't speak like a victor. His voice was low, almost reverent. "These are your people," he said. "And ours. All of us human. What happened was not a nation's act. It was humanity's failure." Then he left the room. No one followed. No one spoke. For hours, Anna sat there, numb, hearing the faint hum of the projector cooling down. In the following days, the mood in the camp changed. The songs stopped. The laughter faded. Prisoners walked with their heads down, haunted by ghosts of places they'd never seen but now couldn't unsee. The Americans didn't gloat. They gave space. Food, routine, work, small normalcies. It was mercy without words. For Anna, the guilt came in waves. She remembered how proud she had been to wear the Luftwaffe eagle on her sleeve. How she'd believed every word of propaganda about honor, purity, duty. Now it all felt obscene. One afternoon, she found herself in the camp chapel, a small wooden building the Americans used for Sunday services. She wasn't religious, but something drew her there. Inside, it smelled of dust and candle wax. A chaplain stood by the altar sorting hymn books. When he saw her, he nodded gently. "Would you like to pray?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't know how anymore." He smiled sadly. "Then just sit. Sometimes silence is prayer enough." So she sat. And for the first time since the war began, she allowed herself to cry. Not for her defeat, but for what her belief had made her blind to. Weeks passed. Allied newspapers arrived at the camp. The headlines told the rest of the story: Hitler dead, Goebbels dead, Himmler captured. The empire she had once believed eternal had dissolved in a handful of suicides and arrests. Every night she wrote letters she couldn't send. "To my father," she wrote once, "you said we were chosen to lead the world. But now I see the truth: we were only taught to follow blindly. If this is what loyalty creates, I want no part of it." Then she tore the letter up and burned it in the camp stove. The camp slowly became something else, not a prison, but a reflection. The Americans invited local teachers to speak about democracy, literature, and rebuilding Europe. Some of the prisoners volunteered to attend. Anna went out of curiosity at first. One professor, a soft-spoken man from New York, said something that stuck with her. "Freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about being able to say no, even when everyone else says yes." The words hit harder than any shell she'd ever heard. That night, she replayed them over and over, whispering them like a foreign language she was desperate to learn. By midsummer, the war was officially over. The fences remained, but the tension had gone. Guards chatted freely with prisoners. American and German women worked side by side in the camp infirmary. Anna volunteered there. At first, it was just to pass time. But when she helped dress a wounded soldier's bandaged leg, something shifted. The soldier, a young American, smiled at her and said, "Danke." She blinked. "You speak German?" He laughed softly. "Enough to say thank you." That moment, so small, so ordinary, carried more power than 1,000 speeches. She realized then that the war might have ended in surrender, but its true victory would come from moments like that. One human being seeing another without hatred. By autumn, most of the men in the camp were preparing for repatriation. The women would follow soon after. On her last night in Camp 27, Anna stood by the fence, staring at the American flag waving faintly under the moonlight. She thought of the first time she'd seen it, through the fog, from the deck of a ship, terrified and defiant. Now she felt something else. Not pride, not shame, just gratitude. She whispered softly into the wind, "You defeated us without cruelty. Maybe that's the greatest power of all." Autumn, 1946. The war was over, but the world still felt unfinished. Anna Keller stood on the deck of a transport ship once again, this time sailing east. The same ocean that had brought her to captivity was now carrying her home. But home was no longer a place. It was a question. Behind her, the stars reflected off the black water like scattered embers. Ahead lay Germany, the land she had defended, the land that no longer existed. For days, the ship moved in silence. No guards, no chains, just the low hum of engines and the restless thoughts of passengers who had seen too much. Some were eager to return. Others, like Anna, feared what waited beyond the docks. She clutched a letter she'd written but never sent. This paper was creased and soft from folding. It read only one line: "They defeated us with kindness." She didn't know if she would ever deliver it or to whom. But she needed to remember the words. When the ship docked in Bremen, the air was cold, sharp, filled with the faint scent of coal dust and ruin. The harbor was barely recognizable. Cranes leaned sideways, twisted like broken bones. Piers were splintered, buildings hollowed. The city looked not conquered, but emptied, as if someone had scraped away its soul. Anna walked down the ramp, her boots echoing on cracked stone. All around her, people moved like ghosts, scavenging, rebuilding, surviving. Her uniform was gone, her rank meaningless. Yet the habits remained. Posture straight, chin high, steps measured. Then she saw the children, barefoot, covered in soot, playing with the wreckage of a burned-out truck as if it were a toy. They laughed. A sound she hadn't expected. It pierced her chest with something sharper than grief. Guilt. She made her way through the city to what had once been her neighborhood. Where her family's home had stood was now an open lot filled with rubble and weeds. A single wall still stood, with a fragment of wallpaper clinging to it. Pink flowers faded almost to gray. A neighbor recognized her. "Anna Keller? They thought you were dead." Her father had died during an air raid. Her mother had fled to a village inland. Her brother, the one who'd written her that final letter, had never been heard from again. Anna sat on a pile of bricks as the news sank in. The Reich that had promised greatness had left nothing but ashes. She whispered, "We believed we were chosen to lead the world. We couldn't even save ourselves." Weeks later, she found work through the American Occupation Office, helping distribute food and clothing to displaced families. It felt strange at first, the former enemy now feeding her own people. But it gave her purpose. The Americans called the aid program CARE. Every crate carried the same simple label, "From the people of the United States." Anna read those words over and over as she unpacked canned goods, powdered milk, and bars of soap. The same soap that once filled Red Cross parcels in her POW camp. Each box was a message, silent but unmistakable. Mercy where vengeance could have lived. One day, while sorting supplies, she found a small note tucked inside a crate. It read in a neat hand, "To whomever receives this, my brother served in the camp at Norfolk. He spoke of you prisoners with respect. The war is over. Let's never forget what peace looks like." There was no signature. Anna folded the note carefully and kept it with her diary. It was proof that reconciliation wasn't theory. It was real, personal, human. In 1947, Anna joined a volunteer organization rebuilding schools across the region. She taught children basic English, words she had learned during captivity. On her first day, a student asked, "Fräulein Keller, were you a soldier?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but not anymore." The boy frowned. "Were you the bad guys?" She smiled softly. "Once I thought the world worked like that, good and bad. But I've learned it's not so simple. What matters is what we do after we're wrong." The boy blinked, unsure how to answer. Then he simply said, "My papa says the Americans are nice." Anna laughed quietly. "Yes," she said, "they are." Years passed. The ruins became neighborhoods again. Streets repaved, shops reopened. The scars remained, but so did life. Every December, Anna would receive a parcel from America. A package with no return address, filled with small gifts. Coffee, chocolate, pencils. Each year she'd whisper the same thing before opening it. "It's not possible." The same words she'd spoken when she first arrived in Virginia, but now they meant something different. Not disbelief, gratitude. In the early 1950s, Anna returned briefly to the U.S., not as a prisoner, but as a guest. The Red Cross had invited her to speak at a small conference about POW rehabilitation. She stood on a stage in Washington, looking out at faces from both sides of the war. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied with each word. "When I came here in 1944, I expected hatred. Instead, I found discipline without cruelty, power without arrogance. You taught me something my own country never did, that mercy is not weakness. It is strength." The audience didn't applaud at first, they just listened. Then slowly they stood. For Anna, that sound, not bombs, not orders, but quiet recognition, was the loudest she'd ever heard. Back in Germany, she lived a quiet life. Never married, no children, but her students remembered her stories. Some grew up to teach history themselves. In her final years, she wrote in her journal, "I thought war was about destroying the enemy, but war, I learned, is about discovering who the enemy really is, and how often it's the one inside yourself." On her last trip to Bremen's harbor, she stood where the first Allied aid ships had once docked. The sun was setting, orange light spilling across the water. She closed her eyes, hearing echoes of the past. The creak of the gangplank, the clang of cranes, the voice of the young guard who'd once said, "Welcome to America." She whispered one final line to the wind. "You won with humanity, and that's why your victory will never fade." The tide rolled in, washing over the stones, erasing footprints from the pier, but not the memory of what those steps had changed. History often celebrates power, but it's mercy that endures. If you want more forgotten stories of transformation, when enemies became witnesses to truth, subscribe for the next film. Because sometimes the greatest victory in war is learning how not to fight again.